The Battle of Sunnyvale Springs, a tale of drones and defiance. The hum of summer was in full swing at the Sunnyvale Springs community pool, where the air smelled of chlorine and sunscreen, and the sun beat down on a Saturday afternoon in late May. I, Tom Reynolds, a 55-year-old accountant with a penchant for spy novels and a decent tan, had one simple goal: to lounge by the pool, crack open the Shadow Operative, and maybe, just maybe, avoid looking like I'd spent the last decade in a fluorescent-lit office. Sunnyvale Springs, a tidy suburban enclave just outside Charlotte, North Carolina, was my homey, a place where manicured lawns and HOA rules reigned supreme. But today, the tranquility was about to be shattered, and I'd find myself at the center of a storm I never saw coming. The pool was a microcosm of suburban life. Kids cannonballing into the shallow end, teenagers strutting around like they owned the place, and adults pretending they weren't annoyed by either group. I'd staked out a prime lounger near the deep end, slathered on SPF 50, because skin cancer doesn't negotiate, and was just getting to the part where the hero defuses a bomb with a hairpin when a scream sliced through the air. Not the playful kind, but a sharp, panicked cry that made my stomach lurch. I pushed my sunglasses down my nose and scanned the scene. Across the pool, near the slippery tiled steps that always seemed to collect a questionable film of algae, a man was clutching his chest. His face twisted in pain, and he stumbled, collapsing onto the concrete. His wife, a kind woman named Ellen I'd met at last year's HOA potluck, where the potato salad was a crime against taste buds, was at his side in an instant, her voice trembling. George, stay with me." The poolside chatter died, replaced by a suffocating silence. Then came the inevitable shout. "Someone call 911. My phone was already in my hand, my fingers fumbling as I dialed. Adrenaline made the numbers blur, but I got through to the dispatcher, giving them the basics. Man down, possible heart attack, Sunnyvale Springs pool. As I spoke, a young guy in board shorts emblazoned with a beer logo sprinted over, yelling, "Does anyone know CPR?" He dropped to his knees beside George, checking his pulse. "I do. Where's the AED?" The AED, our HOA's pride and joy. A shiny defibrillator installed after a lengthy newsletter boasting its life-saving powers was supposed to be in a bright red cabinet by the pool entrance. It was a beacon of hope, or so we thought. Beer logo guy yanked open the cabinet door, only to find it empty. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that felt like the prelude to a nightmare. And then, like a villain in a bad sitcom, Margaret Hensley appeared. Margaret, the iron-fisted HOA president, strutted onto the scene with the confidence of a general surveying a battlefield. Her voice, sharp enough to cut glass, boomed over the chaos. "I've secured the automated external defibrillator in the HOA office," she declared, her floral sundress straining against her formidable frame. There were reports of children tampering with it. It's safely locked away for security reasons, as outlined in the spring newsletter, page 6, paragraph 2. The HOA office was locked on weekends, and Margaret was the sole key holder. George was now flat on the concrete, his face a sickly gray, while beer logo guy started chest compressions, his face grim. "We need that AED now," he grunted. Ellen, George's wife, was sobbing, her voice raw. "My husband is dying, Margaret. Get it." Margaret wrung her hands, a flicker of unease crossing her face before her usual self-righteousness took over. "I can't just leave the office unlocked. Protocol dictates." "Protocol can go to hell," Ellen screamed, her desperation echoing across the pool. The crowd murmured, a mix of shock and anger. I felt my own pulse hammering. This wasn't just absurd, it was deadly. Margaret's obsession with rules was about to cost a man his life. And then, like a bolt from the blue, I remembered my new toy, a cardiac response drone, a $3,000 gadget my wife, Linda, had mocked as another one of Tom's ridiculous purchases. "Hang on," I shouted, already scrambling from my lounger, my book tumbling to the ground. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, her voice dripping with suspicion, "this is an official emergency. Unqualified individuals are prohibited from interfering." I didn't bother responding, just bolted for the gate, my flip-flops slapping against the hot pavement. My house was a 2-minute sprint from the pull-off fact I'd cursed when Margaret was on her lawn uniformity patrols, but today, it was a godsend. I tore into the garage, where the CRD 2000, or Lifeline, as I'd nicknamed it, sat in its box. Linda's voice echoed in my head. "What's next, Tom?" "Delivering pizzas by drone." I'd argued it was a state-of-the-art medical delivery system, and now it was about to prove its worth. I ripped open the box, powered up the drone, and synced the controller. The rotors whirred to life, a sleek blue and white machine humming with purpose. "Deploying AED," I muttered, my fingers dancing over the touchscreen. "Target, Sunnyvale Springs Pool." "Payload, one defibrillator." "Avoid, one overzealous HOA dictator." Back at the pool, the tension was palpable. Beer logo guy was still pumping George's chest, Ellen's sobs were heart-wrenching, and Margaret was no doubt lecturing everyone on proper emergency etiquette. The lifeline lifted off, wobbling slightly as I overcorrected, then steadied as I found my rhythm. The onboard camera feed showed my petunias below, then the fence line, and finally, the pool. Margaret's head snapped up as the drone's high-pitched whine cut through the air. Her face twisted into a mask of fury and disbelief. "What in the name of community bylaws is that?" The crowd pointed, some with confusion, others with hope. "It's a drone," someone yelled. "It's got a box." Margaret's arms flailed. "This is a blatant violation of Section 8, subsection C, paragraph 5, regarding unauthorized aerial devices." I ignored her, guiding the lifeline over George. The controller's deploy payload button pulsed. I hit it, and the AED, in its bright orange pouch, descended on a tether, landing softly beside George. Beer logo guy ripped it open, applying the pads as sirens wailed in the distance. 2 minutes. 2 minutes from Margaret's bureaucratic insanity to a functional AED on site. I exhaled, my hands shaking. The lifeline had done its job. But as paramedics burst through the gate, Margaret pointed at me, standing in my driveway with the controller. "Officer," she squawked, "that man is dive-bombing our community with an unregistered attack vehicle." The younger cop, with a mustache that screamed, "I take my job too seriously," glanced from the drone to me, then to George, where his partner was already assisting. The older cop, Officer Daniels, sighed a sigh that spoke of endless HOA disputes. "Ma'am," he said to Margaret, "can you please not talk for 5 minutes?" I grinned. This Saturday was already more memorable than any spy novel. The paramedics moved with a precision that cut through the poolside chaos like a hot knife through butter. They took over from the beer logo guy, whose name I later learned was Jake, a former lifeguard turned craft beer enthusiast. George was stabilized, his color improving as the AED and paramedics worked their magic. Ellen clung to his side, tears of relief streaming down her face as they loaded him onto a gurney. As they wheeled him past, she broke away, grabbing my arm. "Thank you, Tom," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You saved him." I mumbled something about just doing what anyone would, but her gratitude hit me like a warm wave, washing away the adrenaline-fueled panic. Margaret, however, was not one to be upstaged by a mere life-saving intervention. She'd already cornered the younger cop, Officer Peterson, gesturing wildly as she recounted my crimes. "The audacity, officer," she proclaimed, her voice hitting a pitch that could have shattered glass. "Piloting that contraption over innocent women and children. Think of the trauma, the potential for rogue propeller strikes." Officer Daniels, the older cop, ambled over to me, his face a map of weary experience. He held a small notebook but wasn't writing, just eyeing the lifeline as I guided it back to my garage. "Cardiac response drone, huh?" he said, his tone almost conversational. "Brand new, you said?" "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to match his calm. "Seemed like a good idea when I bought it. Seemed like a great idea 10 minutes ago when our AED was locked up tighter than Fort Knox." I shot a glance at Margaret, who was now reenacting the drone's menacing swoop for Peterson's benefit. "The HOA president here had it in the office. Sole key holder, sir. Said it was to prevent kids from tampering." Daniels raised an eyebrow, scribbling something in his notebook. "Kids tampering with a heart-saving device. Sounds logical." His sarcasm was subtle but unmistakable. "Quick thinking, Mr. Reynolds. You probably saved Mr. Thompson's life today." Warmth spread through my chest, though I kept my expression neutral. "Just glad I could help, officer. Glad the lifeline worked as advertised." He glanced at the drone, now hovering innocently by my garage. "Technically, We could talk about city ordinances on flying drones over crowded areas. But given the circumstances, he shrugged. Let's call it a creative solution to a life-threatening emergency made worse by astonishing bureaucratic nonsense. I snorted, barely disguising it as a cough. Bureaucratic nonsense was practically Margaret's middle name. Daniels turned to the crowd. All right, folks, show's over. Paramedics have it from here. Clear the area. He fixed Margaret with a look. Ma'am, if you still need to make a statement, we can do it at the station. But right now, these people need space. Margaret deflated slightly, her indignation leaking like air from a punctured tire. For now, Mr. Reynolds, Daniels added. Keep that drone grounded unless it's another life-or-death situation. Got it. Understood, sir, I said, landing the lifeline smoothly. Strictly for emergencies. Or, delivering a really urgent pizza. He cracked a rare smile. Don't push your luck, Reynolds. The next few days were a whirlwind. George, I learned from his daughter, was recovering well in the hospital. His family sent over a fruit basket so massive it could have doubled as a life raft, though Linda immediately started rationing the pineapple, muttering about my cholesterol. The neighborhood, however, was abuzz with a different kind of energy. Mrs. Carter from down the street, whose rose garden had mercifully avoided the lifeline's flight path, had filmed the entire incident on her phone. By Monday, the video was circulating on the Sunnyvale Springs Facebook group, complete with comments like, Tom's a hero, and Margaret Hensley needs to chill. But Margaret was far from chilling. Her response to the incident was a masterclass in bureaucratic overreach. My inbox filled with emails from the HOA, each more ominous than the last. Subject lines like urgent review of bylaw violations and unauthorized aerial vehicle protocols set the tone. Written in Margaret's signature passive-aggressive prose, they accused me of flagrant disregard for safety protocols, reckless endangerment of public tranquility, and unilateral deployment of an unvetted aerial apparatus. They hinted at fines, sanctions, and possibly a public shaming at the next HOA meeting. Then came the violation notices, hand-delivered by a nervous teenager I recognized as Margaret's nephew, recently drafted into her junior bylaw enforcement squad. The notices were absurdly detailed, each a work of bureaucratic art. Violation 1. Operating an unmanned aerial system within 500 feet of a community recreation area. Fine, $250. Violation 2. Causing undue public alarm and excitement through a non-standard emergency response. Fine, $150. Violation 3. Failing to obtain prior written consent from the HOA's Architectural Review Committee for aerial equipment. Fine, $300. And my favorite, Violation 4. Implying, through action or statement, that the HOA's emergency protocols were insufficient, thus undermining community confidence. Fine, priceless, pending board review, estimated at $500 minimum. Linda was in hysterics, reading the notices over my shoulder. Undue public excitement, she choked out, wiping tears of laughter. Tom, you're a menace to tranquility. And priceless? Are they billing you for Margaret's emotional distress? I couldn't help but grin. It was ridiculous, but there was a certain charm to the absurdity. The story spread like wildfire. Neighbors stopped me at the mailbox to offer high fives or sly grins. The Facebook group exploded with memes, including one of the Lifeline labeled Tom's Freedom Fighter. But Margaret wasn't done. Convinced the pool was now under siege by rogue drones, she launched a crusade for state-of-the-art anti-drone countermeasures. Her first move was to hire a contractor named Larry Nelson, a man whose van was plastered with images of every conceivable type of net. His slogan, Nelson Nets, we've got you covered, literally. Larry's proposal was to encase the pool in a high-tensile, UV-resistant drone interception NETA giant spiderweb that would, in his words, stop any quadcopter up to 20 pounds dead in its tracks. He unrolled a blueprint with the enthusiasm of a kid showing off a science fair project. Margaret nodded approvingly, her eyes gleaming with visions of order restored. I leaned against the pool fence, trying to keep a straight face. Larry, I said, are we seriously putting a net over the pool? Like we're trapping sunbathers in a reverse aquarium. It's a safety net, Mr. Reynolds, Larry huffed. Aerospace-grade nylon. No more sunlight, then? I pressed. And what about birds, leaves, or the occasional frisbee? Are we hiring an HOA net cleaning officer? Larry's enthusiasm faltered, and Margaret shot me a look that could have curdled milk. Your negativity isn't helping, Tom, she snapped. This is about safety. Safety, I echoed. Margaret, this is a giant string bag. We'll look like a sack of oranges. Larry packed up, looking deflated but hopeful, as Margaret assured him his proposal was under serious consideration. Next up was Gary Jammer Thompson, a shifty character in a shiny suit who looked like he'd stepped out of a low-budget spy movie. His battered briefcase held a device bristling with antennas and blinking LEDs. This, he whispered, is a military-grade signal disruption unit. It'll scramble any drone within 300 yards. They'll drop like flies. Margaret's eyes lit up like she'd just found the Holy Grail. Gary, I interjected, are you talking about a signal jammer? Because those are illegal. Like FCC and federal agents knocking illegal. Gary waved me off. Technicalities, my friend. Cash on delivery, no paper trail. I pressed further. What about cell phones, pacemakers, or the pool's chemical system? Those get scrambled too. Gary blinked, caught off guard. Margaret, undeterred, filed his proposal under active consideration. The piece de resistance was Connie Hawk Larson, a woman who looked like she could wrestle a bear and win. Clad in camouflage, she carried a leather falconry glove and a golden eagle named General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Nature endures, Connie declared, her voice like gravel. My eagles are precision hunters, trained to neutralize drones. Eco-conscious and effective. General Eisenhower shrieked, ruffling his feathers, and Margaret looked ready to knight him on the spot. Connie, I said carefully, are we unleashing attack eagles on kids' birthday drones? What if General Eisenhower mistakes Mrs. Larson's poodle for a slow-moving quadcopter? The eagle fixed me with a stare that made my spine tingle. Connie assured me her birds were highly trained professionals, but I couldn't shake the image of a suburban raptor apocalypse. Margaret, however, was smitten, calling the proposal patriotic and forward-thinking. The absurdity of Margaret Hensley's anti-drone crusade was the talk of Sunnyvale Springs, but I knew the real battle was yet to come. The HOA scheduled an emergency board meeting for the following Tuesday, and the agenda, emailed out with Margaret's trademark verbosity, promised a spectacle. Titled, Comprehensive Review of Reynolds' Unsanctioned Drone Deployment Incident, Case File HOA, 927C, and Consideration of Pool Area Aerial Security Enhancements, it was clear Margaret was gearing up for a fight. My wife, Linda, was practically giddy. This is our Super Bowl, Tom, she said, pulling out a dress she usually reserved for awkward family reunions. The real homeowners of Sunnyvale versus the Drone Avenger. I'm bringing popcorn. The Sunnyvale Springs Clubhouse, a beige box usually hosting lackluster potlucks or the occasional yoga class, was packed to the brim. The neighborhood Facebook group had done its job, hyping the meeting with memes of General Eisenhower dive-bombing drones and Margaret wielding her tiny gavel like a scepter. Neighbors filled the folding chairs, some offering me discreet thumbs-ups as I navigated the crowd. Linda squeezed my arm, whispering, "You've got this, hero." I wasn't so sure. Margaret was a force of nature, and I was just a guy with a drone and a knack for stirring up trouble. At the head of the room, Margaret sat behind a rickety table draped with a faded Sunnyvale Springs HOA Excellence in Governance banner. Flanking her were the other board members, Carl "Timid" Watkins, a nervous accountant who looked like he'd rather be auditing tax returns in a bunker, and Evelyn Baxter, a stern woman whose permanent scowl suggested she'd been personally offended by the concept of joy. Margaret banged her comically small gavel, calling the meeting to order with a flourish that nearly toppled Carl's water glass. Order. This emergency session of the Sunnyvale Springs Homeowners Association is now convened, she declared, her voice dripping with self-righteous authority. She launched into a dramatic retelling of the pool incident, painting me as a reckless vigilante who'd endangered the community with my unlicensed aerial contraption. In her version, she was the calm guardian of order, protecting the pool from chaos while I buzzed the skies like a suburban maverick. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, a few stifled snickers breaking the tension when she mentioned grievous emotional distress caused by the Lifeline's arrival. Margaret transitioned to her grand plan. After consultations with leading experts in aerial threat mitigation, she said, puffing up like a peacock. The board has received 3 innovative proposals to safeguard our pool from future drone incursions. She outlined Larry's net, Gary's jammer, and Connie's eagles, presenting each as a stroke of genius. The audience chuckled openly when she referred to General Eisenhower by his full title, as if he were about to deliver a keynote address. Therefore, she concluded, I propose an immediate special assessment to fund one of these vital measures and the maximum permissible fines against Mr. Thomas Reynolds for his flagrant violations of our sacred bylaws. The room's applause was tepid, mostly from Evelyn and a sweating Carl. Then it was my turn. I stood, clutching a violation notice I'd scribbled notes on, aiming for a tone that was calm but firm, anything but Margaret's theatrical bluster. Evening, folks, I began. I'm not here to rehash every detail of last Saturday. Most of you saw it. George Thompson was in serious trouble, and our AE bot with our dues for exactly this kind of emergency was locked away by our president. I paused, letting that sink in. My drone isn't a toy. It's a medical delivery system designed to get an AED to a cardiac emergency fast, and it died in under 2 minutes. I nodded toward Ellen, who sat in the front row, her eyes glistening. I'm grateful George is recovering because of that delivery. As for these violations, I held up the stack of notices, causing undue public excitement. I'd argue a man collapsing poolside creates more excitement than a drone delivering help. And failing to get prior approval from the Architectural Review Committee? Are we seriously saying that in a life-or-death situation, I need to file a form in triplicate before acting? Laughter rippled through the room, and even Evelyn's scowl softened slightly. Margaret's lips tightened into a thin line. As for these security proposals, I continued, a giant net that blocks the sun? A jammer that'll knock out cell phones and pacemakers? Or me favorite a squadron of attack eagles? With all due respect to General Eisenhower, these aren't solutions. They're expensive, impractical, and possibly illegal. The real issue is ensuring our AED is accessible 24/7, no keys, no bureaucracy. Just as I sat down, a voice cut through the room. He's right, you know. It was Officer Daniels, off-duty in jeans and a polo, standing at the back. The crowd hushed. Our police report commends Mr. Reynolds for his quick thinking, he said, his gaze locked on Margaret. It also notes the primary delay in aiding Mr. Thompson was the inaccessibility of the HOA's defibrillator. Margaret sputtered, her face turning a shade of red that rivaled the pool's lifeguard buoys. Officer, this is a private HOA matter, she protested. Public safety isn't private, Daniels replied coolly. As a resident nearby, I'm concerned your president cares more about a helpful drone than a locked-up AED. The room buzzed with agreement, and Carl looked like he wanted to disappear under the table. Then, to everyone's shock, Connie Larson stood up, her camouflage jacket as imposing as ever, though General Eisenhower was mercifully absent. Madam President, Connie began, her voice steady but sharp. When you contacted my firm, Apex Avian Solutions, you emphasized the need to teach a certain drone operator a lesson. You even asked if my eagles could be trained to snatch small objects, like car keys, to inconvenience him. The room went silent, jaws dropping. My eagles are not tools for petty vengeance, Connie continued. I withdraw my proposal and suggest this board rethink its priorities. She strode out, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Margaret's composure shattered. This is an outrage, she shrieked, banging her gavel so hard its head flew off, bouncing off Carl's forehead and landing in Evelyn's coffee cup with a plop. The crowd erupted in gasps and stifled laughter. Carl, rubbing his forehead, found his voice. I propose we table the fines and security measures indefinitely, he said, his voice trembling but resolute. And we should fund a new, unlocked AED cabinet with backup units accessible to all board members and pool staff. Evelyn, to everyone's astonishment, seconded the motion. Hear, hear. The vote was swift, passing with overwhelming support. Margaret sat frozen, her face a mask of disbelief. The meeting adjourned in a flurry of chatter, with neighbors clapping me on the back and offering to buy me drinks. Ellen hugged me again, whispering, "You're a godsend, Tom." Linda grinned, her eyes sparkling. "My hero," she teased. "The man who took on the HOA and won." As we left, I glanced at Margaret, who was being consoled by a flustered Carl. Not quite a win, I murmured to Linda. More like a ceasefire. But I'll take it. The days that followed were a return to a cautious normalcy. George was discharged from the hospital, his recovery nothing short of miraculous. He greeted me with a booming drone guy. Whenever we crossed paths, his enthusiasm infectious. The new AED cabinet was installed by the pool within a week, its gleaming, unlocked presence a quiet rebuke to Margaret's reign. The neighborhood kids, meanwhile, started looking at me with a mix of awe and wariness, as if I might deploy a fleet of candy-dropping drones at any moment. Margaret, however, wasn't entirely defeated. A week after the meeting, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox, printed on crisp HOA letterhead. It was a violation notice. Minor infraction 001. Improper storage of a recreational/medical-grade aerial vehicle, observed in open garage for 37 minutes on May 24th, exposing said vehicle to public view. Fine, $10. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my coffee. Linda suggested framing it, and I did, hanging it next to the lifeline, which now sported a decal. Sunnyvale Springs official hero aircraft. Margaret's influence waned. Her pronouncements at HOA meetings lacked their usual fire, and she avoided eye contact with me, her gavel incident a lingering embarrassment. The neighborhood settled into a safer, saner routine, but the story of the lifeline lived on, a suburban legend of defiance and ingenuity. The installation of the new AED cabinet at the Sunnyvale Springs pool marked a turning point, not just for me, Tom Reynolds, but for the entire neighborhood. The gleaming, unlocked unit stood like a monument to common sense, a silent reminder that sometimes a little rebellion can spark real change. George Thompson's recovery was the talk of the cul-de-sacs, and his hearty drone guy. Greetings became a daily ritual as I mowed my lawn or grabbed the mail. His daughter, Emily, even stopped by with a homemade apple pie, her eyes misty as she thanked me again for saving her dad. Linda, ever the practical one, sliced into the pie with surgical precision, muttering about sugar content but grinning as she handed me a generous slice. The neighborhood Facebook group was still buzzing with the fallout from the pool incident. Mrs. Carter's video of the Lifeline's heroic delivery had racked up hundreds of shares, with comments ranging from Tom for HOA president to Margaret needs a reality check. Someone had even created a meme of General Eisenhower glaring at a drone with the caption, "Not today, buddy." The online chatter wasn't just gossip, it was a rallying cry. Neighbors who'd never spoken up at HOA meetings were now posting about the need for transparency and better emergency protocols. It felt like Sunnyvale Springs was waking up from a long, bureaucratic slumber. But Margaret Hensley wasn't one to go quietly. Her emails, though less frequent, still arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. One particularly frothy message announced the formation of a community safety and compliance task force, headed by none other than herself, to review and strengthen existing protocols in light of recent reckless behaviors. The implication was clear. I was the reckless behavior. Linda read it aloud over breakfast, her voice dripping with mock horror. Tom, you're a one-man threat to suburban harmony. Should I start hiding the silverware? Only if Margaret starts inspecting it for HOA compliance. I shot back, sipping my coffee. The $10 violation notice for my improperly stored drone was now proudly displayed in the garage, a badge of honor next to the Lifeline's new decal. But beneath the humor, I knew Margaret was plotting her next move. Her pride had been wounded, and in her world, that was a call to arms. Her latest obsession was aerial threat mitigation, a phrase she wielded like a weapon at the next HOA meeting. Held in the same stuffy clubhouse, this one was less crowded but no less tense. Margaret, still smarting from the gavel debacle, had swapped her tiny hammer for a larger, more authoritative model, which she banged with unnecessary force. Carl Watkins, the timid accountant, flinched every time, while Evelyn Baxter's scowl seemed to deepen, as if she were personally offended by the room's existence. The agenda was predictably Margaret-centric, a review of the new AED cabinet, which she took credit for, naturally, and a renewed push for her anti-drone measures. We cannot allow our community to become a lawless airspace, Margaret declared, her voice quivering with righteous indignation. The proposals from our esteemed consultants Mr. Nelson, Mr. Thompson, and Ms. Larson represent the pinnacle of modern security innovation. She glossed over Connie's dramatic withdrawal, focusing instead on Larry's net and Gary's jammer. These measures will ensure the safety of our children and the sanctity of our recreational spaces. I couldn't stay silent. Raising my hand, I stood, ignoring Linda's amused smirk. Margaret, with respect, these proposals are overkill. A net that blocks the sun? A jammer that could disrupt pacemakers? These aren't solutions theory science fiction. The real threat isn't drones. It's locking up life-saving equipment. The room murmured in agreement, and I pressed on. The new AED cabinet is a step forward, but we need to ensure it's always accessible. No more soul key holders. No more bureaucracy standing between us and saving lives. Margaret's eyes narrowed, but before she could retort, a soft-spoken woman named Helen stood up. She was a retired nurse who rarely attended meetings, her presence usually limited to baking cookies for the annual picnic. Tom's right, she said, her voice steady. I've seen what happens when seconds count in an emergency. That AED should have been available immediately. We're lucky Tom had his drone, but we can't rely on luck. The room erupted in applause, catching Margaret off guard. Even Carl looked emboldened, scribbling furiously in his notebook. The meeting ended with a motion to establish a volunteer emergency response team, including training for residents on AED use and CPR. To Margaret's visible chagrin, it passed unanimously. As we filed out, Helen patted my shoulder. You stirred the pot, Tom, but it needed stirring. Linda linked her arm through mine, whispering, You're starting a revolution, drone guy. The revolution, if you could call it that, gained momentum. Neighbors began organizing informal meetings at the local coffee shop, discussing ways to make the HOA more accountable. Someone suggested term limits for board members, a not-so-subtle jab at Margaret's decade-long reign. Another proposed a community app for reporting emergencies, bypassing the HOA's glacial response times. The Facebook group became a hub for ideas, with posts like, Let's make Sunnyvale safer, not crazier, and no eagles, just common sense. Margaret, predictably, doubled down. She sent out a newsletter titled Safeguarding Our Skies, a call to action, urging residents to support her security measures. She even scheduled a demonstration day for Larry's net, inviting the neighborhood to witness the future of pool safety. Linda and I showed up, mostly out of curiosity, along with a small crowd of skeptics. Larry had set up a scaled-down version of his net over a corner of the pool area, a shimmering web that looked more like a modern art installation than a practical solution. Behold, Larry announced, tossing a toy drone into the air. It promptly got tangled in the net, buzzing pathetically like a trapped fly. The crowd clapped politely, but I couldn't resist. Looks great, Larry, I called out. But what happens when a kid's frisbee gets stuck? Or a bird? Are we hiring a full-time net untangler? A few neighbors chuckled, and Larry's smile faltered. Margaret, standing nearby, shot me a death glare. Your sarcasm isn't helpful, Mr. Reynolds, she snapped. Maybe not, I replied. But neither is turning our pool into a fishbowl. The crowd's laughter was louder this time, and even Larry looked embarrassed, packing up his net with less enthusiasm than he'd arrived. Margaret stormed off, muttering about community and gratitude. The demonstration was a flop, and Gary's jammer pitch the following week fared no better. He set up his device in the clubhouse parking lot, proudly explaining how it would neutralize any drone within range. When a neighbor asked about cell phone reception, Gary mumbled something about temporary inconveniences. Another pointed out that the pool's Wi-Fi-controlled filtration system might go haywire. By the time someone mentioned pacemakers, Gary was sweating through his shiny suit, and the crowd was openly skeptical. Margaret's vision of an anti-drone utopia was crumbling, and I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. But the real victory came quietly. The volunteer emergency team took shape, with Helen leading the charge. She organized CPR classes at the clubhouse, and over a dozen neighbors signed up, including Jake, the beer logo guy, who turned out to be a natural leader. The HOA board, under pressure from the community, approved funding for 2 backup AEDs, stored in the clubhouse with keys accessible to multiple people. Carl, of all people, proposed a new policy. No single person could control access to emergency equipment. Even Evelyn nodded in approval, a rare crack in her sour demeanor. As summer rolled on, Sunnyvale Springs felt different, less like a dictatorship and more like a community. Neighbors waved more often, and the pool became a place of laughter rather than tension. George invited me over for a barbecue, where he recounted the pool incident with a mix of gratitude and humor. When I saw that drone coming, Tom, I thought I was hallucinating. He chuckled, flipping burgers. But you're all right, drone guy. Ellen hugged me again, her eyes still carrying the weight of that day. Margaret, meanwhile, was noticeably subdued. Her newsletters grew shorter, her pronouncements less fiery. The gavel incident and Connie's public rebuke had left a mark, and rumors swirled that she might not run for re-election. I didn't gloat not openly, anyway, but I couldn't resist a small act of defiance. The Lifeline, now a neighborhood legend, stayed in my garage, ready for emergencies, or, as I joked to Linda, an urgent beer delivery. I added a second decal, Sunnyvale Springs, where heroes fly. The summer sun continued to blaze over Sunnyvale Springs, but the heat of Margaret Hensley's reign was cooling fast. By mid-June, the neighborhood had settled into a rhythm that felt almost utopian compared to the chaos of that fateful Saturday at the pool. The new AED cabinet stood proudly by the poolside, its glass door gleaming and, most importantly, unlocked. 2 backup defibrillators were now stored in the clubhouse, with keys entrusted to the board, pool staff, and Helen's volunteer emergency team. The policy change ensuring no single person could gatekeep life-saving equipment was a quiet victory, but it resonated louder than any of Margaret's gavel-banging speeches. For me, Tom Reynolds, life had taken on a new shine not just from the tan I'd finally managed to achieve, but from the sense that our community was stronger for it. George Thompson's recovery was nothing short of a miracle. He was back to his old self, grilling burgers and cracking jokes at neighborhood barbecues, always greeting me with a booming drone guy that made Linda roll her eyes. His gratitude was humbling, but it was Ellen's quiet hugs and teary smiles that hit me hardest. "You gave us our life back, Tom," she said one evening, handing me a plate of her famous lasagna. I mumbled something about just doing what needed to be done, but the warmth in my chest was undeniable. The fruit basket they'd sent earlier had long been devoured, despite Linda's cholesterol concerns, but their friendship was a gift that kept giving. The neighborhood itself was transformed. The Facebook group, once a hotbed of complaints about leaf blowers and mailbox paint colors, had become a forum for action. Helen's emergency team grew, with Jake, the beer logo hero, stepping up as a co-leader. They organized monthly drills, teaching residents how to use the AED and perform CPR. Kids who'd once eyed me warily now asked about the Lifeline, their curiosity outweighing any fear. One brave 10-year-old, Timmy from down the street, even asked if I could make it drop candy next time. I laughed, promising to consider it. Linda warned me about sparking a sugar-fueled riot. Margaret, meanwhile, was a shadow of her former self. The Great Gavel disaster and Connie Larson's damning testimony at the emergency meeting had stripped her of her authoritarian aura. Her newsletters, once novella-length treatises on bylaw adherence, were now brief and perfunctory. At the July HOA meeting, she spoke softly, avoiding her usual fire and brimstone rhetoric. When she glanced my way, it was with a flicker of unease, as if I might summon the Lifeline to buzz the clubhouse. The rumor mill churned with whispers that she might step down as president, a prospect that had neighbors quietly celebrating over iced tea on their porches. But Margaret wasn't entirely defeated. True to form, she managed one final act of petty defiance. A crisp envelope arrived in my mailbox, bearing the HOA's official letterhead. Inside was a violation notice, as meticulously crafted as ever. Minor infraction 002. Excessive illumination of a residential garage interior, observed on June 3rd, potentially disrupting neighborhood aesthetic harmony due to visible aerial vehicle storage. Fine, $15. I burst out laughing, loud enough to startle the mail carrier. Linda, reading over my shoulder, shook her head. "She's got nothing left but this, Tom. It's almost sad." "Almost," I agreed, already reaching for a frame. The notice joined its predecessor on the garage wall, right next to the Lifeline's decals, Sunnyvale Springs' official hero aircraft, and where heroes fly. I added a third, just for fun, aesthetic harmony disruptor, EST 2025. Linda groaned, but couldn't hide her smile. "You're incorrigible," she said, kissing my cheek. "And I love it." The lifeline itself became a local legend. Neighbors stopped by to see it, some joking about borrowing it for pizza deliveries, others asking if it could be used for community events. I kept it grounded, per Officer Daniel's advice, but its presence in my garage felt like a quiet promise. If push came to shove, it was ready. The drone wasn't just a gadget, Anna Maria, it was a symbol of what could happen when someone stood up to absurdity and fought for what mattered. The community's newfound unity was palpable. The coffee shop meetups continued, with neighbors brainstorming ways to keep the HOA in check. A petition for term limits gained traction, and Carl Watkins, emboldened by his gavel-induced bravery, hinted at running for president if Margaret stepped down. Even Evelyn Baxter softened, offering a rare smile when I complimented her hydrangeas. The pool, once a battleground, was now a place of joy, with kids splashing and parents lounging without fear of bureaucratic overreach. One evening, as Linda and I sat on our porch, sipping lemonade and watching fireflies, George and Ellen strolled by. "Hey, drone guy," George called, waving. "Got any plans for that thing this weekend?" I grinned, raising my glass. "Only if you start clutching your chest again, George." He laughed, and Ellen squeezed his arm, her eyes shining. "Let's hope it stays in the garage," she said. "But it's good to know it's there." The final HOA meeting of the summer was a triumph. Margaret, visibly deflated, announced the board's decision to indefinitely shelve the anti-drone proposals, citing community feedback. The room erupted in applause, and Carl, in a moment of uncharacteristic boldness, proposed a resolution to honor local residents who demonstrate extraordinary initiative in emergencies. It was clearly aimed at me, and when it passed unanimously, even Evelyn clapped. Margaret abstained, her silence louder than any speech. As we walked home, Linda linked her arm through mine. "You did more than save George, Tom," she said. "You shook things up. People are paying attention now." I shrugged, but her words settled over me like a warm blanket. Sunnyvale Springs wasn't perfect, but it was better, safer, friendlier, and a little less beholden to one woman's ego. The lifeline stayed in its place of honor, a quiet guardian in my garage. I returned to my spy novels, my lounger, and my quest for the perfect tan, but life felt richer now. The pool incident had been a wake-up call, not just for me, but for all of us. It reminded us that community isn't about rules, it's about people looking out for each other, even when it means flying a drone into the heart of HOA territory. As I settled into my lounger one sunny afternoon, the familiar scent of chlorine in the air, I flipped open the Shadow Operative and smiled. The hero was defusing another bomb, but I'd already defused one of my own, a bureaucratic one, with a little help from the lifeline and a lot of help from my neighbors. Sunnyvale Springs was ours again, and no amount of violation notices could change that. The story of Sunnyvale Springs is more than a suburban sag. It's a testament to the power of standing up, whether against petty tyranny or life-threatening inaction. It's about the courage to act when it counts, the absurdity of unchecked power, and the strength of a community that finds its voice. I hope you've enjoyed this tale of drones, defiance, and a very persistent HOA president. But more than that, I hope it makes you think. Violence and injustice take many forms, from the dramatic to the mundane. Sometimes it's a physical threat, like a heart attack left untreated due to locked-up equipment. Other times, it's the quieter violence of bureaucracy, stifling common sense and endangering lives for the sake of control. What do you think about the balance between rules and compassion? Have you ever faced a situation where standing up to authority meant breaking the rules to do what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective. Let's keep the conversation going and make our community stronger, one story at a time.